Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte Bentley and I'm a research fellow here at Emmanuel. I'm looking forward to telling you a bit about my work on 19th century opera and what I've been up to recently. During lockdown, many of you have probably been enjoying watching live streams or on-demand performances of opera and theatre from around the world. London's Royal Opera House, New York's The Met, and Opera Australia in Sydney are just some of the ones I've seen. While I think we're all looking forward to being able to go to the theatre or a concert again in real life, we're also probably feeling pretty lucky to live in an age where technology allows us to feel globally connected as we sit and watch performances, sometimes thousands of miles from where they took place. But opera's global credentials and the idea that it allows people to feel connected to people in widely disparate places are rather older than we might think. As I explore in my work, they have their roots in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, long before the digital technologies that allow us to indulge in those live-streamed or on-demand performances, and in fact, even before the age of steam transport. We tend to think of opera in national boxes, so French opera, Italian opera, German opera, and for good reason, given the linguistic component of these works, and also the handful of important opera houses in Paris, Milan, Bayreuth, etc., that we often associate with them. But my work is part of a relatively recent move in opera studies towards thinking transnationally about opera, exploring how people, materials, and ideas crossed national boundaries and created a sense of global interconnectedness. Opera's first travels beyond Europe were closely tied up with colonial enterprises, as imperial powers frequently viewed building an opera house in a colonized locale to be a sign of power and of their ideal of civilization. But in many places, particularly in the Americas, which are my focus, opera took root in ways that can't be explained simply by its links with imperial power, and which persisted and continued to develop long after they became independent. So how do we go about studying opera's travels and their significance? The obvious place to start is to think about performances of specific works in non-European locales and to explore how they were put on, whether they were altered from their European versions and how they were received, etc. But I also think there's more to understanding opera in the 19th century world. I'm interested in discovering how opera's travels left their mark in wider culture beyond the opera house, whether that's in terms of the impact an opera troupe had on the economy of a city or a town, or on the production of specific cultural products like novels or sheet music. These are what I like to think of as being opera's blurry edges, and they illustrate in really fascinating ways how ideas about opera, in terms of its cultural significance and the imaginative possibilities that it afforded, could circulate independently of staged performances. I'm in the process of finishing a book about opera in New Orleans in the first half of the 19th century. The French theatre in the city was home to the first permanent opera company in North America between 1819 and 1859. It imported its troupe each year from Europe, giving performances several nights a week, not only for New Orleans' population of French speakers, but also for culturally aspirational Anglo-Americans. Importantly, in New Orleans, as in the United States more generally in this period, opera wasn't thought of as being an elite art. That idea only started to emerge around the middle of the 19th century, and the theatre's audiences were more socially and racially diverse than we might perhaps expect. I've been piecing together the transatlantic connections that enabled this French theatre in New Orleans to thrive when previous local theatres had failed to last beyond a couple of seasons. There's no extant archive for the theatre though, so I had to be a bit creative about the kinds of information I wanted to uncover and where I could find it. I spent time looking at archives in New Orleans and in Paris, and also in a couple of smaller French regional archives, to try to reconstruct the picture from both sides of the Atlantic, as well as the usual newspapers and private letters, which are frequently used to write theatre histories. I ended up using court cases and notarial records, as well as popular sheet music and novels, to build up an image of a highly connected transatlantic opera scene and the people who made it all possible. Some of these were really vibrant characters, like John Davis, who was the director of the French theatre in New Orleans. He bankrolled opera productions from the profits of his gambling empire, and if a few accounts from the time are to be believed, from also some less legal means as well. What I discovered through all this work was that in the popular imagination, as much as in reality, opera became simultaneously tied to specific places, whether that was the origins of an individual work in Paris or in an adapted form to the city of New Orleans, and also managed to transcend place by crossing oceans and national borders and standing for emerging aspirations to cosmopolitanism. In New Orleans, groups and individuals used performances of opera and its wider cultural image as a means of negotiating local, national, and international identities for themselves. In other words, it helped them to conceive of themselves and their city on an emerging world stage. The new project I've started working on goes another step further to suggest that opera didn't just cross borders and help people imagine themselves transnationally, but that it actually contributed to globalization during the 19th century. I'm using Cuba as a starting point to explore the operatic networks that formed between the Americas during this period. As well as mapping out the routes along which troops travelled and the performances that they gave, I'm taking a slightly different approach to opera by thinking of it as a kind of commodity, which could be traded and exchanged for financial as well as cultural capital. This means looking at it in relation to other important commodities that were traded through Cuba in this period, such as sugar and cotton. It was opera's balance between aesthetic and these commercial concerns, I think, that made it an effective force for globalization in the period. To wrap things up then, focusing on opera and its relationships with transnational movement and global connection gives us a new way into exploring the history of the 19th century world. Looking at opera's travels and the meanings that people attach to opera, both inside and outside the theatre, helps us to see how the arts shaped the modern world in both tangible and less tangible ways. Thanks for watching.